Okay, so we're now going to start to tie this all together, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a timer which every certain amount of seconds refreshes the contents within our messages element on our page. So we're going to head over to chat.js and start to create our JavaScript. Now we've already included jQuery, so we can make use of quick jQuery methods like the AJAX method, which is extremely useful. So this makes it really easy for us. The first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to create a global object called chat. Now this might be part of your other JavaScript global objects, but otherwise you can just leave it in one. It just avoids cluttering sort of the global namespace with lots of different variables and stuff like that. So the first method that we're going to be creating, or the first function that we're going to be creating, is going to be fetch message. So I'm going to say chat.fetchMessage equals function. Now here what we're going to do is we're going to AJAX to our chat.php file here, which is then going to return this data. So let's build up our AJAX method first and see what kind of stuff we're going to be sending to the script, and then we'll start to create this. So we can even test this AJAX method anyway. So we're going to say AJAX, so we're using the jQuery AJAX method. The URL that we're sending the AJAX request to is ajax/chat.php. That's this file just here. We need to define the type of request. In this case, it's going to be post. The data is going to basically contain the variables that we're sending to the page. So in this case, we're going to have one called method, and that's going to be fetch. Now when we send messages, we're going to have another one on here. That's going to be the message that we're actually sending through, but don't worry too much about this. Now we have a success callback, which allows us to define or run a function based on whether this has been successful or not, and we can retrieve the data in an argument here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say we're going to select a particular element on the page, which is going to be chat.messages, and we're going to say .html data. So what's going to happen here is we're going to call to this file with the post data the request method of type, and we're going to be sending this method variable, and the contents of this will be fetch. So this will tell us in this chat.php to fetch, and then on the success of that, we're going to place the contents within the element just here, which will then show up in here. So whatever we have in our chat.php file, this will display here. So for example, let's go ahead and edit this. Let's just make this a bit smaller so we can see what's going on. If I was to say in here echo hello, in fact let's blank this for now, and let's create our interval. So down here I'm going to say chat.interval equals set interval, and in here we're going to run a particular function. That's going to be chat.fetch messages, and we've already created fetch message. Let's call it fetch messages, and that is going to be we could have it every 5 seconds, but for now let's do it every 2 seconds just so we can see what's going on. So we're going to go ahead and refresh now. Let's go ahead and inspect an element anywhere, and we'll go over to the network tab, and you can see that every 2 seconds this chat.php file is being accessed. Now this is really poor for networking speed, so it probably should be a larger number. There are also other ways that we can sort of make sure this doesn't call unnecessarily, but in this case we're just going to be doing it in the inefficient way, but it's going to work. So in this case now, it's calling this file every so often. So whatever I do in here will appear in this window just up here. So if I go ahead and type PHP and save that, nothing happens. We get a syntax error there because we have an unexpected end. So if I end the PHP tag and save it, you see it goes. So every 2 seconds, it's now calling the content of this file. So if you cause an error by typing an A in, use of undefined constant A, assumed A. So we get the general errors you'd normally find. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and then echo hello, save that out, and we echo hello there. So this is the basis of calling this file every so often. Now what we actually need to do is go ahead and create a real content to this file. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the first thing I'm going to do is require in our init.php file, because we need to make use of the objects that we've created, or the classes we've created. We also need to do a preliminary check to make sure that the fetch variable has been set. So this is post. And empty. Sorry, this is going to be method. There we go. So we also need to check if this isn't empty. So empty equals false. So let me just quickly explain this. If we go back to chat.js, you can see we've sent this method variable and it's fetch here. Now when we create the throw message function, we're going to be saying throw here instead. So this is basically going to pick this up, and then in here we're going to have an if statement to say, if this is fetch, then fetch the messages and output them. If it's throw, then pop the message in. So what we're going to do here is instantiate a chat object, so equals new chat, and then under here we're also going to say method. Let's pull this along a bit. Method equals $_post method, and we're also going to trim this. So now what we can do is we can say if method is equal to fetch messages and output. Otherwise, if the method is equal to throw, and we need some more checks here, but we'll leave that out just for now. Throw message into database. Cool. So the first thing that we're going to do here then is fetch messages. So what do we need to do here if the method is fetch? Well, we need to call the fetch messages method that we created earlier in our, let's just go ahead and find it in here. So we need to call this method here. So we say messages equals chat fetch messages. And then we need to do a couple of checks. So if this is empty, so if there are no messages, we need to show an error message. So I'm going to say if something, otherwise something else. So I'm going to say if empty messages equals true, then we echo. I've already got a predefined message here that I can just copy and paste over, but obviously that's entirely up to you. So if the if messages contains nothing, so if it hasn't returned anything from the database, then echo there are currently no messages in the chat. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and loop through the messages. So we use a for each construct, and what we're doing is we're saying for every message, call it message, as message. So for every message, call it message. And then I'm going to break out of PHP, back into PHP, and in here we're going to start to create our markup just as we did earlier. So I'm spacing all this out, it's a bit messy, but it's just so it's easier to read. So we have a div class of message, and remember we had that anchor link here, and then we had says, and then we had a paragraph with the data. Now we need to take this from message and then output it here. So in this case, we'll break back into PHP and we'll say message username. Now these correspond to the field names. And remember we did a print R on this fetch messages a couple of videos back. So you'll know that by doing a print R, you'll see the data that you can actually output from these arrays. So all this is we're literally looping through an array and then outputting the data contained within each element of the array. So in the paragraph will just be the body of the message. So in this case, it will be message. And then in here, the field will be message. And that's about it. So as long as everything has worked correctly here, when we go back to here, it's already refreshed, because remember we're refreshing every 2 seconds. So while we've been coding away there, these messages have now been looped through and output into our chat area here. So that's essentially it. So every 2 seconds now, this chat is refreshing itself. Now I'm just going to go ahead and change that to a slightly larger number. I'm going to say every 8 seconds, just because it's, let's say 5 for now, just because it's quite often to refresh. And you have to take into consideration that if you're refreshing constantly and AJAX into a file constantly, you're going to have this problem. Now we also have the problem that when I refresh, we don't get this appear for 5 seconds because the interval won't initially execute the function that we define within it. And what I mean is that when we set the interval here, it waits 5 seconds, then executes this fetch messages function. So underneath here, what we need to do is we just need to say chat.fetch messages, and all that will do is it will initially fetch the messages, and then 5 seconds later will start to kick in with this interval. So when I click refresh now, that's automatically loaded, and then if you look at the bottom here in my network tab, after 5 seconds we'll see another chat.php, and this will just constantly call it. So we've now done that. The next video we're going to actually create the functionality to type a new message in here, hit enter, and for it to be sent using our throw message method, and pop that into the database.